What I observe unfolding in the South China Sea represents nothing less than the systematic implementation of a maritime blockade strategy that could strangle global technological civilization without firing a single shot, while China deploys what military strategists call gray zone warfare to achieve comprehensive economic dominance over the semiconductor supply chains that enable every aspect of modern society, from smartphones to military systems to medical equipment that keeps critically ill patients alive. The intelligence is clear, crystal clear. Chinese naval forces are implementing systematic choke point control throughout the South China Sea while maintaining plausible deniability through civilian fishing fleets, Coast Guard operations, and commercial shipping manipulation that operates below traditional military conflict thresholds, yet achieves strategic objectives equivalent to total economic warfare against democratic nations dependent on Asian semiconductor production and Pacific trade routes. What troubles me most profoundly is the systematic vulnerability of global technology to Chinese maritime control. Every advanced microchip powering artificial intelligence, military systems, automotive manufacturing, and critical infrastructure depends on semiconductor production concentrated in Taiwan, South Korea, and facilities throughout the South China Sea that China can systematically isolate through maritime operations that appear civilian in nature yet accomplish military objectives. I am analyzing intelligence assessments that detail Chinese development of comprehensive blockade capabilities, including submarine warfare, surface vessel coordination, aerial surveillance, and underwater sensor networks that provide total domain awareness throughout critical shipping lanes. Chinese military planners have systematically studied historical blockade operation while developing modern capabilities that combine traditional naval power with cyber warfare, satellite surveillance, and economic manipulation for maximum strategic effect. The semiconductor supply chain vulnerability extends beyond immediate manufacturing into comprehensive technological dependencies that affect every sector of modern economic activity. Advanced semiconductors from Taiwan Semiconductor's manufacturing company enable everything from hospital, life support systems, to agricultural, automation equipment, to banking, transaction processing that developed nations depend upon for basic societal functionality. Chinese blockade of semiconductor supply chains would trigger immediate technological regression across multiple civilizations simultaneously. Congressional oversight of Pacific defense planning reveals systematic coordination gaps between economic vulnerability assessment and military and response capabilities. American naval forces operate under traditional conflict scenarios, while Chinese gray zone operations achieve economic warfare objectives through methods that fall below clear military response thresholds, yet produce strategic consequences equivalent to major military defeat. What makes Chinese South China Sea strategy particularly effective is the systematic integration of multiple warfare domains, including maritime operations, economic pressure, information warfare, and diplomatic coordination. With authoritarian allies, Chinese operations proceed through seemingly civilian activities that accumulate into comprehensive strategic control, while democratic response mechanisms prove inadequate for addressing systematic, non-kinetic warfare. Regional alliance coordination for South China Sea security faces unprecedented challenges as traditional military alliance structures prove inadequate for gray zone warfare scenarios. The Philippines, Japan, Australia, and South Korea face different vulnerability levels into Chinese economic pressure while maintaining divergent military capabilities and political constraints that complicate coordinated responses led to Chinese maritime operations. The economic implications, of South China Sea blockade scenarios extend beyond semiconductor shortages into comprehensive supply chain collapse, affecting automotive manufacturing, consumer electronics, medical equipment, aerospace systems, and agricultural technology that modern societies depend upon for basic functionality. Chinese control over South China Sea shipping routes provides leverage over approximately 40% of global maritime trade, while semiconductor dependencies create technological vulnerabilities that exceed any previous economic warfare scenarios. Intelligence community assessments regarding Chinese South China Sea operations indicate systematic preparation for escalation scenarios that combine maritime blockade with comprehensive cyber attacks against semiconductor manufacturing facilities, port operations, and logistics coordination systems throughout the Pacific region. Chinese cyber capabilities target manufacturing, control systems, shipping, coordination networks, and financial transaction processing that enables global trade functionality. The Taiwan dimension of South China Sea control represents the ultimate strategic objective for Chinese maritime operations. Taiwan's geographic position provides natural choke point control throughout South China Sea shipping lanes, while Taiwan's semiconductor dominance offers comprehensive economic leverage over democratic nations dependent on advanced microchip production. Chinese control over Taiwan would provide simultaneous maritime dominance and technological supremacy that could determine global economic relationships permanently. Military response scenarios for South China Sea blockade operations reveal systematic challenges in escalation, management, and alliance coordination, traditional naval confrontation with Chinese maritime forces, risks comprehensive military conflict while accepting Chinese maritime control, signals strategic defeat that encourages further Chinese expansion throughout the Pacific region. The technological sovereignty implications of Chinese South China Sea control extend beyond immediate economic consequences into long-term strategic competition for technological leadership in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and advanced manufacturing that determine economic and military competitiveness. And for generations, Chinese control over semiconductor supply chains would provide decisive advantages in every technology sector while eliminating democratic technological independence. Allied naval capabilities for South China Sea operations face systematic limitations in sustained maritime operations at distances that exceed traditional alliance logistics capabilities. Japanese, Australian, and Indian naval forces and provide regional capabilities but require American logistics support and coordination for sustained South China Sea operations against Chinese maritime forces operating from mainland Chinese bases. The timeline implication of Chinese South China Sea strategy reflect systematic preparation for decisive maritime operations during optimal political and military windows. Chinese naval modernization, artificial island construction, and maritime infrastructure development indicate operational readiness for comprehensive South China Sea control scenarios within current strategic planning timelines. Information warfare coordination with maritime operations reveals systematic Chinese efforts to manipulate international opinion regarding South China Sea territorial claims while portraying maritime blockade operations as a legitimate territorial defense rather than aggressive economic warfare. Chinese information operations target domestic audiences in democratic nations with narratives that emphasize economic costs of military confrontation while minimizing strategic consequences of accepting Chinese maritime dominance. Counter-blockade capabilities that democratic allies possess remain fragmented across multiple national naval forces while lacking comprehensive coordination. Mechanisms for sustained maritime operations, alternative supply chain routes for semiconductor production require years of infrastructure development, while Chinese blockade operations could achieve immediate strategic objectives through maritime choke point control. The precedent implications of successful Chinese South China Sea control extend beyond regional maritime dominance into systematic demonstration that gray zone warfare can achieve comprehensive strategic objectives without triggering effective democratic responses, while providing templates for similar operations in other critical maritime regions throughout the world. Recovery scenarios from Chinese South China Sea blockade operations require comprehensive supply chain reconstruction, semiconductor manufacturing, diversification, and alternative technological development that exceed reasonable conflict resolution timelines, while Chinese strategic advantages become increasingly difficult to reverse through military or diplomatic means. As I conclude this analysis, I recognize that the South China Sea represents more than regional territorial disputes. It represents the critical battleground where technological civilization's future will be determined through maritime control that enables comprehensive economic dominance. The decisions made about South China Sea, defense, semiconductor, supply chain, diversification, and allied maritime coordination will determine whether democratic nations maintain technological independence or become permanently dependent on authoritarian powers for the technological foundation that enables the modern democratic civilization.